chat with Glendora, a show for living right. A chat with Glendora makes your day so bright. Words of inspiration, jokes to make you smile. Come relax and chat with Glendora for a while.
Hi, Glendora. You have asked me for over a year to record for educational purposes how an American dream can turn into a nightmare due to our criminal judicial system with the attorneys, judges, and banks. This surely needs big revision of the law in the United States. My story is really a second Bleak House story. The first Bleak House story was written in the 1850s by Charles Dickens, and the result was to change British law. Our law needs a huge cleaning up of the cesspool, which includes a large percentage of judges, lawyers, and of course the banks. They are one big happy family who are and have destroyed many lives and families. They use what we call a burn bag that assures destroying records and documents. It's been 30 years since my husband passed away, and it's been enough time for me to experience and to endure great torture with many of their schemes and tactics. At one time, 60 Minutes had a program on how the lawyers actually run our country, which includes judges who are merely glorified lawyers in black robes. Now, I came from a family that was very brave, industrious, and hardworking, which I believe must be in my DNA. My mother's parents came to this country when she was 3 months old. Quite brave, I'd say. Also, a relative in the Netherlands saved many people on a sinking ship, of which a statue was erected of him in his name nearabout. On my father's side, his ancestors founded the town of Zeeland, Michigan, of which my family name, Velderman, appears with a group of people on a monument. My grandfather had a large brick company in Michigan, and his friend, Henry Ford, would stop in for coffee when he tried his cars out on the country roads. However, my father reminded me many times of how hard the Depression was in the 1930s. I was born on a farm in Beaver Dam, Michigan. My parents moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan when I was 5 years old. At 7 years old, my mother exposed me to classical music by attending the Grand Rapids Symphony concerts. I was impressed as a child by the famous woman pianist Myra Hess. Being in awe of the beautiful music, I also wanted to speak through my music as she did. I'm sure I was also impressed by the applause and glamour. Then my parents got an upright piano for me. My mother then inquired and found a highly recommended piano teacher whose first husband was the founder of the Chicago Symphony by name of Malachi. At the time of her death, she left me many valuable original Chicago Symphony scores of music. I was a sensitive type from a strict Calvinistic Dutch background. Prayer and reading the Bible at evening meals was a must. And I say we as a family because it included my brother, myself, and another fella, a friend in the neighborhood whose mother and father had both died, and he had no relatives and he had nowhere to go, so my mother took him in. Also my mother's brother, because he was only 12 years old when her mother died, his mother, and my Mother also took care of her sickly father. So when I say we, I include all of us who were taught about love, giving, trust, and honesty. And I must say my mother was a very caring and strong person. We were not exposed to so-called worldly activities such as dancing, since this involved bodily movement, and Hollywood movies. Even makeup was discouraged. Church twice on Sunday, plus Sunday school, and no work or shopping on Sundays. However, I was allowed to practice piano on Sundays. Perhaps this all reminds most people of the Pennsylvania Dutch. At 12 years old, I had a vision that God spoke to me that I should speak through my music. Later, I did feel the restrictions as to dancing, etc. It gave me some insecurity, I feel, in exposing my talent while performing. I felt it made me more inhibited with my emotions, which I had to overcome. In retrospect, I remember at one point my hands would stiffen or freeze at the keyboard. But because of my fight and determination, I overcame this anxiety in my zeal to perform. Well, Glendora, I guess in many ways I'm really trying to say my success and accomplishments were hard fought and did not come easily. As a child, I did 6 years of intense study after school, probably about 3 hours after school hours, with my mother supervising my practicing and attending all my lessons. At age 13, my teacher entered me into the Western Michigan piano competition, and at 13 it was the junior division. Now, Joseph Maddie, the founder of Interlochen Music Camp in Michigan, was the main judge. Well, I had a touch of success since I won the junior division. Joseph Maddie said, due to your age, I could not give you the prize for the college division. However, with your flighty fingers, I predict you'll be in Carnegie Hall at age 18. Well, of course, all of this was, in a way, I guess a surprise to me, and my prize was to perform the Beethoven Piano Concerto No. 1 in C major with the Grand Rapids Symphony. I remember I was quite nervous, but it was successful, and I was well received, and much publicity in the Grand Rapids press with photos, etc. I had a couple of drawbacks in my life after that. I was an attractive young girl. However, I was told to refrain from book reports because as I was growing, my eyesight got worse, and I had to wear glasses, which was not a fashion statement in those days. Previously, I had very good grades. However, in my teens, I saw my classmates having a good time going out, and my teacher was putting photos up on the billboard in the classroom about my success with the piano, and my classmates appeared to me to look at me as though I was a genius or someone different, which I wasn't. Consequently, my grades were also affected. I suppose my concentration level went down. And when graduation time came, my mother went to the dean of the school about my grades. His advice was, she's not college material. She's better off attending secretarial school or learn shorthand, etc. This, of course, was bad advice, since he knew about my success at the piano, but he really didn't care. So, off to the office, Glendora. I worked in an office. I went and I went out with my friends. I had good times, and consequently it affected my music. My father bought me a car so I could drive to work. Now, I was also restless. I even entered the Grand Rapids Beauty Contest, and I might add I did not win. Then I drove to New York City with my friends, and we stayed at the Biltmore Hotel, as I recall, near Grand Central Station for a short vacation. I had different jobs of no interest. Went to college one year, majored in piano, and the teacher said she's talented but doesn't work hard enough. Now came the time when my parents said, look, if you work in an office and do not continue your music, your piano, you must pay room and board. Now this upset me, and I said, you do not love me. I must add that my brother did work to pay for his tuition for college. Now, I also must add that this was one of the best lessons my parents could have given me, because underneath I thought, I will show you. Now here comes sort of the beginning of my American dream. Glendora, after several jobs, I landed a job as a secretary to a lovely lady, Barbara Brown, who took a great interest in me. And it was at the community chest in Grand Rapids. She saw I did not have my heart in my work and wanted to know what my interest was, because she said she could see that it was not office work. I explained my musical background. Now, she was very interested in art and music and was a graduate of Chicago University. She had plans to go to New York City to live a year or two to write poetry. She also knew artists such as the brilliant artist named Carl Andre, and there was another artist which maybe has some people may know more of, the name of Frank Stella, and many others. She at one point asked to hear me play and invited me to her parents' home to listen to classical music, in those days on her record player. She was very impressed when she heard me play and said, why not work hard, Suzanne, at your music and try to attend Juilliard Music School in New York City, because I'm going there maybe in a couple years, and it'd be great if you could go there. So she said, forget about the fun. Work hard and your life will unfold on its own. Well, it all sounded good, but I knew my parents could not afford to send me to New York City to attend Juilliard. So her suggestion was, Grand Rapids has a lot of money. You can get a foundation or a grant to help you. She got my interest and determination up, and I got in touch with my teacher's second husband to see if he would allow me to practice at his piano studio. He was also a cellist, since it was close to the office where I was working. He agreed. Now my routine was I'd get up at 5 a.m. to practice until 7 a.m. My father would make breakfast for both of us before we went to our respective jobs. My job was from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Then I'd grab a bite to eat and go to my teacher's studio from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Drive home, 30-minute drive, sleep from 11 to 5 a.m. and start all over again the next day. So I was on a treadmill until after about a year and a half, I came down with mononucleosis, and I had to take a break to rest. Now, my teacher's husband said he thought New York City was much too tough for me. He said one must be physically beautiful and competition is very keen in every way. However, I did manage to be fitted for contact lenses, which was quite a new thing in those days. That's 50 years ago. So Barbara, my employer, my boss, the one who had spoken to me about going to New York, also loved fashion as I did, and would discuss the fashion designers and taught me how to apply eye makeup. And then a break came my way. While going to work in the morning, I carried my music, and a very pleasant gentleman was on the elevator and said, "Young lady, How is it? I always see you carrying music in the morning to work." I briefly explained why. This all gave me the idea perhaps he would know of any financial help for me, since he had an insurance company on another floor and would know a lot of important people. I told Barbara, my employer, and she agreed and encouraged me. So a little later, I knocked on his door and asked to see him to present my problem. He was very pleasant and said, "Come back in a couple days, I'll think about it." I did, and he suggested that he could invite a group of prominent people at someone's home where they could meet me and hear me play, including the music critic who wrote about me when I was 13. Now remember, I'm already in my early 20s, and many students who attend Juilliard are from 17 to 20 years old. Some are even as young as 14 years old, such as our present-day genius, Yu Zhao Wang. I think I pronounced that right. This girl is unbelievable in every way. And also, there's the pianist Lang Lang, both Chinese, but they attended the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. They are fabulous. So, of course, I was nervous because I knew this would either make me or break me, so to speak. Now, in those days, people were more formal, so I appeared in a lovely black silk suit that I had designed, and my mother made it in a hurry for me. My determination and hard work got me through, and the music critic gave the go-ahead sign by saying, "She's worth your investment." Now, families took a personal interest in me also, and I guess they liked my appearance, my manner, and above all, probably my dedication and determination. This was really interesting, since one of the families who I had worked for in their office in the past didn't recognize me, and it's a good thing he didn't, because I was fired as a receptionist because I forgot to wind their grandfather clock, and I suppose I always made some kind of mistakes since I didn't like office work. However, later on, this gentleman and his wife were so kind to invite me to swim in their pool at their home, since they heard me play, and I presume they didn't recognize me. Also present were members of a lot of prominent families. I mean, the Kellogg family and the Gerber family, food family. There were a lot of families that seemed to live in Fremont, Michigan. And there was the Bissell, the family of the Bissell company, and the Blodgett Furniture Company, Kendall Furniture Company. There are a lot of prominent people there. Now that they gave me the go-ahead sign, I had to get ready for my audition at Juilliard. Okay, now I have to say I never lived outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan, which was quite challenging to think about. My mother was tearful at the airport as the plane took off for New York, since I was alone. I was never alone like that, going outside of Grand Rapids. I don't think my father knew what to think. I believe my sponsors got me through reference letters to stay at the International House across the street from the old Juilliard building in New York on Claremont Avenue near Columbia University. I remember hearing in those days that Juilliard had a total of 500 students in attendance, so one had a slim chance of getting accepted. They were very selective. I believe it was my confidence and hard work, of course, and determination that got me through the audition. And believe it or not, I did get accepted. Well, Glendora, guess what? I was on the way to my American dream, not knowing what was ahead of me, And it's a good thing I didn't know. As Barbara said, your life will unfold on its own. However, remember, I also believe God had a plan. So I stayed at the International House, which was some experience for me. I thank God I think I had a guardian angel, since I survived many and all experiences, and I am still standing. And I'll add, I'm still young and energetic for my age. I did, by the way, work part-time to make a little extra money. Now here's how my life unfolded. I was assigned to a teacher at Juilliard, which I was not happy with. So I went to the dean and asked for another teacher, which he did assign to me. However, I didn't like him either, for different reasons, which I will not go into. Now this made me quite unhappy and also quite worried. Again, God was watching over me and gave me a break. So now an opera singer studying at Juilliard invited me to a dinner party. I was not a party type, however, she convinced me to attend. Now, as I said, in those days, everybody dressed more than today, so really I dressed like a model. I remember what I wore. However, I was very reserved and quiet, so I created interest as to who I was. The host happened to be the nephew of George Gershwin. The host asked me about my music and wanted to hear me play. I told him I was not happy at Juilliard due to my teachers that were given to me. So he said, Suzanne, Juilliard is not the end of the world, you know. He suggested I audition for his uncle, who married into the Gershwin family, who was retired and was teaching in New York City. He said he had taught at Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. He was the head of the piano department there with the famous pianist Joseph Hoffman. Of course, I was only concerned whether my sponsors would go along with my idea of studying privately instead of being enrolled at an institution, because that was a big step, of course. So I did audition for Dr. David Saperton and told him my situation. He agreed to take me on and give progress reports to my sponsors, and he did recommend that they continue to help me. He didn't like the idea I had to work part-time, so he agreed to charge me just $5 a lesson when that was, well, it was longer than an hour, really, so when they were really $20 in those days. Today that would probably be $300 an hour, maybe to even $500. I don't know. I really don't know what it is today, but I know it's much higher. So the requirement was I had to be in his studio at 8:30 a.m. and he would have me work hard at transposing and improvising, and also work on the weight distribution at the keyboard. He then would give me lunch and send me on my way to practice the rest of the day. He said, "You are very fortunate. I've only heard of sponsors like you have in Chopin's day." You know, anyone who would take a personal interest the way these people were taking an interest in me. So then I had to get an apartment with another female dance student, since I couldn't keep practicing at the International House. Now, one of my sponsors, Mrs. Sally Blodgett, took a special interest in me along with Mrs. Mildred Vogt, and got a used Steinway grand piano for my apartment. They kept track of my progress, as did Mr. John Hibbard, the insurance gentleman, who really was responsible for all my progress in going to New York City. Mrs. Sally Blodgett had an apartment in New York City and had me give her piano lessons and go to concerts at Carnegie Hall. I also met Dr. Saperton and would listen. She also met Dr. Sapton and would listen to me perform at his studio. Now, she had a home in Portland, Oregon, and she asked me to give a recital at the Portland Museum. Interesting side issue is she was really a lot of fun, and she took me in a private plane to show me all of Grandfather Blodgett's forest. Acres and acres of it, where they used it to make fine furniture in Grand Rapids and other parts of the world. It was most interesting, of course, and as you may realize, most people realize that Grand Rapids, Michigan was known for making fine furniture. Well, when I returned, Dr. Sapton entered me into a recording competition, of which 68,000 pianists competed, and I did win the Paderewski Gold Medal. We met many people through Dr. Sapton. The Gershwins, Duke Ellington, Dr. Sapton taught his nephew, one of George Gershwin's doctors, other interesting people in art and music, some of his former students from Curtis who made a reputation for themselves. I was Sapton's really prized student at the time, and he left me scores of Godofsky transcriptions and some of the valuable scores of music with his markings, transcriptions, and so on. There was the famous pianist, also very good pianist. Godofsky was a very famous pianist. And then there was also, I believe, a brother-in-law of Gershwin who was a fine violinist. So we met a lot of interesting people. Now, the other step in my life, I will continue on my second episode here. This will be the end of number 1. So the second one, it will be continued on the second one. Thank you very much.
20.
Okay, 5:20. Glendora, this is episode 2. All right, Glendora, I think where I left it off was my roommate, a female roommate that I had met, had this apartment with me, and she was studying dance and worked part-time as an executive secretary. Now, she invited me to meet her employer, and they were going to have lunch at Club 21, and she wanted me to meet him. He heard about me since she had spoken about me, and it happened to be that his birthday was on the same day as mine, so it was a birthday luncheon. Now, he loved music and art, and Joan, the name of my roommate, assisted him in collecting American art. So he met many young artists, and he was also on the board of directors of the Guggenheim Museum. Now, his name was Edmund. He heard me play later and wanted to meet my teacher, Dr. Sapton, and consequently enjoyed many social events with the Gershwin family, and also Duke Ellington we met, and many pianists with reputable names that had studied with Dr. Sapton at Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. Now, Dr. Sapton heard of a summer course at the French Academy of Music near Monte Carlo, which was headed by the famous woman pianist at that time by the name of Jean-Marie Derey, who had made a hit in New York City. He suggested I apply, which I did, and it was decided I attend for the summer. I got a diploma from the academy and met many people besides Jean-Marie Derey. There was a Bulgarian violinist conductor who became interested in me as a person and musician. I wrote Edmund and Dr. Sapton about my experience since it was about time for me to come back home to New York, and they immediately phoned me on the night rate and said, please hurry and get back home soon. I was quite surprised when Edmund wrote how much he valued me and would be interested in possibly marrying me. I was surprised since Edmund's marriage had problems. However, he was not interested in divorce or remarriage. On the other hand, my music was so important to me that I really did not plan on marriage. I was quite confused. Dr. Sapton added to the mix by saying, "Why would Edmund want a poor musician like you? Just be glad that you are safely back home." Edmund was 23 years older than I was, and his children were all grown in their early 20s or near 20. Dr. Sapton suggested I meet an older woman who had in her younger years, she had studied with him. Her name was Jean Thorpe, very nice person, who had been married to a rather wealthy man who had helped her and supported her music. Sapton suggested she meet with me to discuss my music and future. She also stressed how fortunate I was to have a person like Edmund interested in me and my music. Now, going back to Barbara, who was my former employer in Grand Rapids, who encouraged me to study in New York, she was in New York, and actually she had married Carl Andre, the talented artist, and she often telephoned me to see how I was doing, and we'd meet for lunch or dinner. And she was really against my possible marriage to Edmund. She had visions that I should marry a prince. That was all great and fine, but Edmund really was a prince in my mind. So Sapton stepped in and insisted I telephone Barbara in his presence and explained to her that presently I could not see her because he felt no one should discourage me against Edmund. Edmund and I knew each other for 3 years before we did marry in 1969. It was the best decision to marry Edmund, who loved music and supported my idea of performing. Also, it sure put my parents' mind at ease, and my sponsors met Edmund and thought this was a Cinderella story. Now, Edmund and I would drive around on weekends looking at homes for sale. Finally, we settled for a beautiful home in Westchester, overlooking the Hudson River. It was owned by Elizabeth Gordon Norcross. She was the editor of House Beautiful magazine. She was a friend of Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect, so of course many of his ideas were in the house. Each room had the walls were of different woods, like one room would be with birch, another one with cherry, another with mahogany. It was very interesting and very beautiful. We spent a year having it restored and met an expert at that from Panama who restored the woods. And we also had a greenhouse, a Lord and Burnham greenhouse that we restored. As my husband said, it's a jewel box for 2 people. It was not large, but on 1.8 acres, as I say, overlooking the Hudson River. A gentleman from Panama suggested he could introduce me to Lee Strasberg when he found out I was a pianist. And Lee Strasberg, as you know, is the film director and teacher of films. So he wanted me to meet him to discuss my music and performances. I did, and Lee Strasberg suggested he gather people at his apartment for them to meet me and hear me perform. Everything going on, I did not feel ready at that time. So I didn't go ahead with that at that time. We were busy looking at different homes, and we were working on different things and trying to get adjusted to our new environment, both working, of course, toward the American dream. So 1 year after our marriage, the stock market crash came in 1970. And it really hit Edmund hard. So being in trouble financially, he said, "I think you better divorce me because I'm out of money." I said, "Well, I think I might take my chance because I think you have the talent and ability to make it many times over." And I didn't believe in divorcing for that reason anyway. He still put the house up for sale. A young doctor who was single and in cancer research, and also he was a surgeon, he fell in love with the house. He said it was so romantic overlooking the Hudson River on the 1.8 acres. And it was great for entertaining. House Beautiful actually photographed a lot there, so they entertained there. And it was on 3 levels. A lower level, a middle level where the house was with a courtyard, and an upper level. He said he could put a pool in the lower level, which would be great for entertaining. So he offered 3 times what my husband paid. My husband telephoned his younger brother, who was in admiration of my husband, and asked his advice. He said, "I'd take the money and run." However, my husband gave it great thought and took my advice and made it many times over in the end. Working hard, he became chairman of Governor Nelson Rockefeller's Business Advisory Committee. He had Rockefeller's designer from Japan, as I recall, to discuss what kind of pool to put on the property. He suggested a black pool to reflect trees, etc. So my husband had a 20 by 40 foot black pool, heated, put in. He knew I loved swimming, and I loved fountains, and like the Europeans and Italians had, so he actually put a fountain in on the deck also, overlooking the Hudson. My husband worked hard with his management consulting company. In fact, he wrote a book on the marginal cost system, which was something he had learned from a mentor of his, and he developed it. He was in the top 50 of management consulting companies. Plus, he worked on increasing his purchase of real estate, commercial and residential. He did have trouble with real estate managers finding a good one, so he asked me what I thought of him training his oldest son, Eddie Jr., to manage the buildings, since Eddie Jr. had trouble locating the right job. I didn't know what to say because he was not my son. So I said, "Well, he's not my son, it'd be better, you know him better than I do." So he did give him the job in the end. I should have said no, because it turned out to be a thorn in my husband and my side. It was just very difficult. We found out that you could not trust him. As we were working and progressing along, my husband worked on arranging auditions for performing and managers, along with his business proposals. He also purchased a 9-foot Steinway concert grand, which he bought for me on time. And eventually, a year or so later, I believe it was, they made me a Steinway artist. We traveled through snowstorms knee-deep for his business interviews and my auditions. Some were failures and some were successful. My husband had a saying, "They think we are drowning and we keep popping up." Now, Edmund was gifted with fight and determination, just as I was. And we also used our home for a lot of entertaining, which it was designed for. So it was a great place for, business entertaining and so forth. My husband asked me my church asked me if they could use it for a benefit. Consequently, it was the start of a lot of prominent people that came to our home, and one was Cab Calloway, who entertained at this particular benefit. We had members of the Rockefeller family and the Annenberg family, and then later on, Skitch Henderson, we met him and he came there. Christopher Forbes and Robert Forbes, because of an art collection we collected. And then it included the director of the Metropolitan Museum, who wanted to view the art collection. And then we even Cary Grant called us wanting to rent the house in exchange for one of his homes, since his daughter was going to attend master school, which we had to decline. Of course, Frank Lloyd Wright had stayed at the home also when Mrs. Norcross, the original owner, lived there. My husband and I, Glendora, we had a very good relationship. His business opened doors for me, and my music and performing opened doors for him. He entertained many executives and their wives, which usually involved me having to entertain on the piano, and then opening with prayer before the meal. Let's say again, Glendora, we were working toward the American dream, right? As we're taught in this country. He often reassured me that I was a big help for his business. We never gave up. Got disappointed, but one gets back up and, you learn from any failure. My husband also said, "You have no idea what that world is like out there." And I really didn't. He protected me. Now I have found out, haven't I, about the silent thieves, as I call them. But he is not around to help me, and they know it. On my own, and also through managers, it resulted in a lot of concerts. My husband worked on auditions for me and wrote many orchestras and so forth, along with his meetings of interviews. So it included also managers. We had a couple of them, but it resulted in concerts in London, Rome, Mexico City. It was international. And then actually in Mexico City, it resulted in sending a video up in satellite in the United States here, of which 130 PBS TV stations took it, and really had shown it in many large cities in the United States. So we met Skitch Henderson. He had a demonstration tape made with me in London with the London Philharmonic, and had me as soloist for the opening of the Sheboygan Opera House in Michigan, plus an appearance in Carnegie Hall. And in my performances in the United States, one conductor wanted me to play in Rome different times, which was very interesting. Really enjoyed it. I also performed many times in the Whale Concert Hall, the concert hall next to Carnegie Hall, and many others. We had a TV interview with Victor Borge and the pianist Eugene List, which was fun. Victor Borge is quite a personality, and we had a good time. However, it all required a lot of work and time and preparation. Very seldom did we go on a vacation. It usually had to be involved with business. My husband would often work on holidays. Now, my husband also had claustrophobia and did not like to fly, so in those days he insisted on taking the Concorde, which was a wonderful experience, and he was even still nervous on that plane, but we got through it. It was much shorter, of course, and quicker than the regular planes. So now my husband he also knew of a resort which was originated by the Rockefeller family near South Palm Beach, where we would stay occasionally. It was not ostentatious. It had cottage-like rooms attached on the ocean, with a club-like room for entertainment and meals. And later we managed to stay at the Breakers Hotel in Palm Beach. As I say, my husband never stayed long. As I said, he did not like vacations. So on one trip, my husband heard of a showing of 19th century British art at the Playhouse in Palm Beach, Florida. So we went to view the paintings, and when we were viewing them, we met the dealer from London who we were very impressed with the paintings. He showed us many paintings, and we were very impressed with them. My husband wanted me to pick out 2 of them to purchase, which I did to start a collection. My husband had a collection of American paintings which I thought could be improved on, so he ended up donating it to the Hudson River Museum in Yonkers, New York. The only painting he didn't get rid of was a Sargent painting, which has another story of how badly it was handled for sale, because later with the estate it was up for sale and ended up, I believe, all the money, they dragged it out so long because of any problems in selling it, and it ended up, it was just legal fees, so we got no profit out of it. So, and anyway, he donated these other paintings to the Hudson River Museum in Yonkers, New York, and he proceeded to study and collect all the many 19th century British art. Edmund sat up many nights into the morning doing research on the 19th century British art and keeping in touch with the London dealer. We made a trip to London, where the dealer introduced us to the Forbes collection, which was housed in London. It was a fabulous collection which resulted us in meeting Christopher Forbes, who was in charge of their collection. My husband explained ideas with Christopher, nicknamed Kip Forbes, about the paintings that were up for sale. We became friends and attended many Victorian tea parties that Kip was in charge of. In a rather short period of time, we acquired a beautiful collection of 45 paintings. Now, Kip's brother, Robert, he took photos of the collection, came to our home and took photos of the collection. And Kip stated that our collection was the best in the United States at that time of 19th century British art. Forbes' collection was much larger, and that was housed in London. So that was in London, and ours was in the United States. But my husband named the collection, actually he labeled it as the Suzanne and Edmund art collection because of my assistance. And also the collection was exhibited in the United States and traveled to Europe. They were like our children going on a trip. Skitch Henderson also gave us 2 King Charles Spaniels by name. We named them Tippy and Lady Dash. We named the female Lady Dash since it was the name of Queen Victoria's favorite dog. Before that, we had our beautiful Irish setter, Coco, which was Coco like Coco Chanel, and we showed her, she got a lot of ribbons a beautiful dog. Anyway, we were enjoying the fruits of our labor. So on one of the trips, my husband also decided to look for some property in Florida as either an investment or a place for us to go to. We looked at many homes, including commercial properties, for investment. We did end up getting a small home, a condo, in Manalapan, Florida, since the large homes were much too large and needed restoration and were too expensive. My husband had a Frank Lloyd Wright room added with a fountain and a skylight since he knew I loved fountains. He purchased the Steinway Grand that my sponsors had in my apartment for this particular condo. We did not go to the home often because, as I said, he did not like vacations. Now, at one of our invitations in New York to dinner, we went to the University Club in New York, invited to a dinner gathering there. We met a partner of White & Case law firm, which had his eyes on my husband. Of course, through business connections, my husband met many people, but I felt this particular person did not like me. Somehow, White & Case lured my husband to meet with them to do estate planning and a will. I don't believe my husband realized White & Case's enduring client was Bankers Trust Company from the year 1903. However, we did not discuss that issue. Perhaps my husband was not aware of their history, which, of course, took a lot of research from the group that helped me later. At that time, I knew nothing about their business relationships. They never revealed matters to me, and I believe they had an ethical duty to do so. I had a personal savings account which my husband set up with his broker or financial advisor, who was also connected with the White & Case and Bankers Trust group. The trouble is they knew about what money I had because of their relationship, which I found out later is not a great idea, because they had known, basically it was not good, since later on, with all the money available in the estate, they told me to use some of my personal money until they got everything worked out. If I had known then what they were going to do to me, I would have refused. But I trusted them. I didn't know. So now, also, White & Case and Bankers Trust wined and dined us at cocktail parties and also a private luncheon with the vice chairman, Phil Hampton, hosted it, and there was Mike Phillip, one of the vice presidents there, and many other, a few others. It was a private, very private luncheon. And they had us at a lot of cocktail parties, and they really gave us the white glove treatment. Also, members of White & Case and Bankers Trust came to our home to discuss business matters, including areas of the will. Now, I'm going to go into, in the next episode, I'll go into some of the meetings and how they personally gave us real personal treatment. I mean, meetings at our home and meetings with them, as I say, their cocktail parties and so on. So I think, Glendora, I probably have had my time for the second episode, and I will get prepared for the third episode. Anyway, I can just say that, just to review here what will be on the third one, is that I recall there was a meeting at my home at which Eddie Jr., my husband's son, attended. And being an artist, I was not up on all of this. I was quiet and I didn't ask questions, and I remember standing in the doorway of our library after everyone was seated and had tears in my eyes, just thinking, what would I do without Edmund, my husband, who helped, protected, and adored me? I mean, my husband saw this, so he asked me to come into the room and to sit near him. So I think, Glendora, I will proceed with the rest of this meeting on episode number 3. I want to thank everyone for listening to this. I hope you can follow from one to the next that I have, but thank you very much. I don't know how Glendora, this is episode number 4 of the McCormick estate. I was going through the executors actually, and just to review, it was the one executor was by the name of L. House, and he was with nursing homes, a nursing home partner with my husband. And the second one was actually my husband's accountant, Herman Markowitz, who was a licensed certified public accountant, CPA. And he had a conflict, actually. The truth is, he did, with doing the management, the books for the operating manager, Eddie Jr., and he did the estate's books, and then he wanted a commission, of course, for being an executor. So anyway, now I'm on the third executor. There were 5 executors in the state. And first of all, I'll say there were many conflicts and many problems. They didn't really, White and Case, Win Rutherford of White and Case and Bankers Trust Company, really, they were not really following the will, as far as I'm concerned. Often they would say, even David Kiko of Pillsbury Winthrop, the lawyer who's covering for the bank now, whenever you have a problem, he doesn't want to see you. He just says, the judge, we'll go to the judge, he'll decide. Well, if they have the judge in their back pocket, as we now know, why wouldn't they go to the judge? He'll decide for what they want. The system is definitely corrupt. There's no question in my mind. So the third executor here that my husband picked was Bankers Trust Company, of course. As the will stated, however, White and Case, in filing the probate papers, listed Bankers Trust of New York as an executor. That is not a correct name. They have in the permanent papers testamentary dated January 25, 1989. That's what they had, Bankers Trust of New York. Anyway, the problem is that Bankers Trust Company of New York did not come into existence until 10 years later, 10 years after death, September 7, 1999. So this is serious. Of course, letters testamentary are like the Bible to an estate. David Kiko of Pillsbury Winthrop tried to cover up by stating that Bankers Trust of New York is geographic. Because it states New York, it's geographic. Either he doesn't know the history of Bankers Trust, or he is outwardly lying. I had special research people dig up proven facts. One law firm asked if my research people would work for them. I thank God I have a loyal person who heads my group, so that did not occur. Also, why didn't, as they pointed out to me, why didn't someone like Jody Keltz, the attorney referee for probate court, discover this wrong entity, Bankers Trust of New York? Incidentally, I was also told that Jody Keltz and her husband, through a stroke of good luck, acquired a house in Scarsdale from an estate in the court where she worked for an exceedingly reasonable price. It's another conflict. It's serious. Actually, these things are all serious, but they were overlooked. That's all, by all of them. The fourth executor was myself as a non-independent executor, since I was to be a beneficiary. And the fifth executor was my stepson, Eddie Jr., who was also non-independent executor, and since he was going to be a beneficiary, as were his other siblings. But they weren't executors. Eddie Jr. was the executor because he was managing the real estate. I don't know, a lot of these conflicts people are not aware of, which at the time I was not aware of. But why weren't my attorneys aware of it? They had to be aware of it. Okay, now, Many attorneys that I did interview, by the way, did not want my case because they would be seriously threatened. One attorney said he had a family and he could not lose his law license. Another attorney said, I've handled one serious estate, a large estate, which we all know, and I'm not going through that again with the McCormick estate. So, this is what's going on. Now, as we talk about my dear friend Wynn Rutherford of White and Case, the lawyer there, according to, shortly after my husband's death, White and Case, according to the law, unlawful thing rather, they legally abandoned the estate by representing the bank. In filing for, the reason was because in filing for a repayment of a loan that my husband had made of Bankers Trust, a $500,000 loan, in early February of 1989, my husband died in 1988, they fraudulently represented the bank in order to get the repayment of the loan from my husband. And then they didn't, which actually, according to a certain judge, which I'll go into later, but he admitted to a newspaper friend of ours, Ralph Martinelli, that this was a serious conflict, and they abandoned, as he worded it, the estate because they represented the bank in the repayment of a loan from my husband. So they actually abandoned the estate, and they could not be an estate attorney any longer. However, they continued to act as an estate attorney, and they submitted legal invoices. After about 3 months, they rendered a bill of $250,000, which I objected to, and as one executor, they went ahead and paid it because the head of the trust department at the bank, William Wilkie, said, well, you were outvoted, so we're going to pay it. So anyway, that they paid them that, and then later on they tried to bill, I think after the final accounting, they tried to bill around $600,000 more, which wasn't paid, but I think at this point it might have been paid. We don't really know. They didn't really consult me or speak to me about any of this. And of course, as I say, if they did put me through anything, it's always the court, the judge. Okay, now, as I said, they abandoned the estate when they filed the papers representing Bankers Trust Company for repayment of the loan. Also, my other attorneys, such as Peter Raymond, Mark Oxman, Ray Dowd, they should have all known about these serious matters. I paid them huge legal bills, totaling over $1 million in total. Bankers Trust Company told us as executors it's customary to have the person who drafted the will to be the estate attorney. Of course, at that time, we didn't really know what was going on. We didn't know about the abandonment and so forth. They failed to inform us and educate me about these material facts and other material facts, that this was a conflict, and it was a close, they had a close relationship, Bankers Trust did, since 1903 with White and Case. And perhaps my husband did not know that either. And we did not find it out till 1999, after Deutsche Bank purchased Bankers Trust, and it became a convicted federal felon, 3 felony counts. So what happened to the other 3 executors? The answer, they were just grabbing what they could. So actually none of them really legally did the correct thing as executors. Neither party revealed any of these material facts to us. Now, I'm stating all this for educational purposes so people will try to educate themselves so they will not be taken in by these con men. Someone once stated to me, trillions of dollars have been lost through the transfer of money. Now I believe it. By the way, I'll quote Habakkuk 1 verse 4 in the Bible. The law has become paralyzed, and there is no justice in the courts. The wicked far outnumber the righteous, so that justice has become perverted. Glendora, we're all taught good manners and to keep silent and do not talk openly about these matters. It's personal business, and most people do not want to hang out their dirty laundry. And then, of course, most people are afraid because of the enemy will retaliate. So, and also I had people's advice to me. They would say, you better take what you can get or you will get nothing. Of course, my answer is one cannot work out of fear. We must be positive and not afraid. I believe justice will prevail in the end. We see in the political arena today, one cannot be afraid. The truth must come out and justice must be given. I know another victim, and even myself, who had been told in the court, there is no justice in this court. Another victim stated to me, Suzanne, and it was from a prominent family. Many things were done to them also, and they said, you are not alone and we are not crazy. That's another thing. At one time, one of the lawyers of the court, and the referee, I don't know exactly his title, but he's in the surrogate court, and he said that little old lady, that crazy old lady. He was referring to me. Now, Judge Scarpino's law secretary asked me, what do you want? And maybe it was his secretary who said that. The crazy old lady. She doesn't want to settle. Judge Scarpino's law secretary asked me, what do you want? My answer was justice. You see, they do not like that answer because they do not believe in justice. He said, there's no justice in this court. How much do you want? How much money? Do you want to talk to the bank? They are in the other room. I agreed to meet with them. He then came back to me and said, they do not want to meet with you. Now tell me, who's in charge? The court or the convicted federal felon bankers trust company? Is the fox in charge of the hen house? Okay, now I get off my philosophy here, approach, and get back to the facts. I believe at one of the first executors meetings when Rutherford stated, I guess to everyone, but he looked at me, of course, Suzanne, you are the last to receive any money. Perhaps he should have explained to me. I really could not believe what I heard. I mean, when I heard it, it's like it hit you. Like, what is this man saying? That sure was not my husband's desire. Rutherford drafted the will for my husband, Win Rutherford. He knew what my husband wanted. I surely do not object to paying debts, in the estate, such as the repayment of my husband's $500,000 loan to be paid to Bankers Trust Company. I didn't object to any of that or any debts, but I am the last to be paid. However, White and Case in Bankers Trust also, I must add, had liquidated the stocks and bonds amounting to at least $7 million early on. So they surely could have covered the $500,000 loan repayment and also my $500,000 legacy that my husband said was due 1 month after death. My husband made that very clear. He also told me, be sure you get that 1 month after death. That's what you get. So they stalled the payment, and after 30 years now, I've received approximately half of the $500 in 2 separate payments. Now, they then even suggested I use some of my personal savings until they got things straightened out. Incidentally, I have to add my personal account was with a financial advisor who had a working relationship with Bankers Trust and White and Case. They all worked together. They knew how much money was in that account. The second statement from Win Rutherford of White and Case was, "There is so much money in this estate that it will never run out." Now, why did he say a thing like that? Why? I guess to make me feel better, maybe. He said, you get interest from the date of death that is not, or on whatever you do not receive. You get it, interest. Why did he say these kind of things? Just to make me feel better, I guess. Another wonderful surprise Win Rutherford had for me was, since McCormick and Company was left to me, my husband's company, it may be a good idea, Suzanne, to sell it to Eddie Jr. for $1. Now, I know these things do occur, they happen, but wait a minute. My husband obviously wanted me to have the company. He didn't want his children to. So Win obviously knew I was grieving and lost with no good advice. Win tried to encourage me by stating that if Eddie made a profit, I could get a percentage and interest paid by the company. My husband left it to me since he didn't want, as I say, any of his children to run the consulting company, including Eddie Jr. I also believe Eddie did not want to deal with my husband's marginal cost system, which my husband had written a book about and was very successful. So Eddie really could not run it. Instead, Win could have helped me to either sell it or simply close it, which is what should have been done. Also, there was much information in the files in the office on the art collection, etc. There was furniture, many, I guess there were computers or typewriters, so forth, and some paintings for me to go through, which I did, but there were files in there with a lot of information. After all, over the years, it was in the top 50 of consulting companies, even though it was going downhill due to my husband's illness. Actually, I have a very interesting story, if I can tell it a minute, as to the value or interest there was in the company before my husband's death. About a year before my husband died, he was alerted that a meeting was secretly going to be held in one of the rooms of his office after business hours. Some of his employees were plotting to get the company. My husband came home and suggested we get our Irish setter, Coco, on her leash. Take her to the office, let her off the leash after closing the door for her to follow their scent. We did, and sure enough, she found them right away in one of the office rooms. They were quite alarmed, and I imagine quite afraid, since Coco was a big dog and could sense who we did not like or approve of. So I guess the company was of interest and quite buyable, and it was in the top 50 out of thousands of companies. They were a member of Acme Consulting Companies also. I mean, they're the Acme Group. Then the next suggestion Win Rutherford had for me was, you really should think about selling your two homes, the one in Florida and the one that my husband and I really loved was the one in Dobbs Ferry, and my art collection on top of it. My husband suggested I would be able to live in my home in Dobbs Ferry until my death, which he was hoping. And I know he had tried to plan different times, so I would be there through my whole life, the rest of my life. And he even I investigated about a historical type of thing, because it was the editor of House Beautiful had owned it, and Frank Lloyd Wright, it was like a Frank Lloyd Wright home, of course. It was very special. Win Rutherford simply said, well, you'll need money. You must, and I must add here then, down deep I wanted to trust these people that they knew best about investment and money matters, etc. plus when Rutherford drafted the will. So, well, I'll think again, you know. Perhaps he wondered what money I had. I don't know. I looked at different homes just to please them, but didn't allow them to sell my 2 homes. I wasn't interested. It was too early for me to make any decision like that. However, they did hook me with the art collection. They caught me early before I could really concentrate and do research on the paintings and get advice from friends and business advisors. I was basically standing alone. Later on, I found files in the office of McCormick and Company, which, of course, were left to me, which would have been of help. Finally, I had them transferred to my home in Dobbs Ferry. They leaned towards Sotheby's rather than Christie's to sell the collection. Sotheby's made it known to all the dealers about the sale, including the London dealers. D.D. Brooks was the former chief executive of Sotheby's, and Alfred Taubman was the owner and chairman. D.D. Brooks had a private luncheon prior to the sale of my art collection. This was facilitated by White & Case and Bankers Trust Company, who we know now had no legal standing with my husband's estate. The con men were busy feathering their own nest. They had another meeting at which they told me prices had to be lowered. Now, of course, I believe I understood what was going on. Now I definitely know what was going on. There was also a reception in London, and for all the dealers to view the paintings, which I also attended. By the way, there's actually a book written about the art of the steal, S-T-E-A-L. My collection ended up being an estate fire sale. I was told later, of course, I should have stopped the sale from advisors and friends of my husband. Later, Sotheby's was charged with a federal violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, price fixing and rigging of art auction prices. Several of my paintings were lowered below their value, with Wynne Rutherford and White & Case and the bank encouraging me to go ahead. I also believe my financial person went along with the idea. Time-wise, I believe about a year later, Christie's invited me to a reception where one of my paintings that sold for $200,000 at Sotheby's was now up for auction at Christie's for $600,000, and it sold for that. I was told by a few experts that there were quite a few other paintings in my collection in a similar situation, and I pretty much know which ones. The sale was done so quickly before I got to my husband's files in his office in regard to the paintings, correspondence, etc., which was all left to me. Now, Glendora, being upset about the sale of the paintings and the estate in general, my brother asked me to give a piano recital in a church near Atlanta, Georgia. Even though I was drawn away from the piano with all of this going on in the estate, I really wanted to prepare and get back to my music, so I accepted the date. My concert, when I performed there, it was well received, and my brother informed me that a gentleman by the name of Wayne Smith, the head of Friendship Force, stopped in to hear me and was impressed. The former president, Jimmy Carter, was one of the leaders of the Friendship Force with Wayne Smith. Wayne Smith offered me, as a representative for the United States, a tour to Georgia, Russia for 1 month. Of course, I knew my husband would have been thrilled with the idea, so I decided I'd try to work hard and accept it. I took a friend along and many of my gowns, since they were also going to make a film of me. I was a guest of the then President Shevardnadze. His granddaughter was my interpreter, and his daughter drove us around as needed where we had to go. I really did not feel musically or emotionally prepared. However, I knew my husband would not want me to pass up such an opportunity. Since some of my concerts were canceled due to the fall of the Soviet Union, and they produced a documentary film which was shown at the Moscow Film Festival, and as I understand it, won a top reward, as I was told. They also filmed me in the diplomatic quarters, performing and wearing many of my beautiful gowns, since fashion was one of my interests. I love to design and create with music and fashion. When I presented my plans to the bank in White & Case, Win Rutherford, they suggested since I'd be gone for a month, I should give my executive powers to the bank while I was gone. With no attorney and no advice, and still trusting, I agreed, thinking they would work in my best interest. At the executors' meeting before leaving for Russia, I was looking for Win Rutherford of White & Case to say my goodbyes, and finally found the attorney, Win Rutherford, and Eddie Jr. meeting in a room with the door closed. Now, I believe they were rubbing their hands together, plotting what they could do while I was gone. With big smiles, they wished me a great trip. Okay, now I think this is near the end of this section, and I will proceed further with the next episode, which will be episode number 5. And you want me to keep going?
You got 30 seconds.
Okay, well, I can add that the next one will start with when I returned from my trip 1 month later. I was asked by Wayne Smith of Friendship Force if I would go on another tour, extensive tour, representing the United States throughout Europe, performing for world leaders and presidents of various countries. Okay, now I think that will conclude this portion of my episode, and I will proceed with the next episode when I can. Thank you. Okay, I'm back with episode number 5 of the McCormick estate. I ended the last one by saying that I was ready to leave for my trip to Russia, Georgia, Russia, for my tour. When I returned from my trip 1 month later, I was asked by Wayne Smith, again, I think I'll repeat this so you follow through, Wayne Smith of Friendship Force, if I would go on another more extensive tour representing the United States throughout Europe, performing for world leaders and presidents of various countries. I saw what was going on in the estate, which I explained to Wayne Smith of Friendship Force. I didn't think I could concentrate in preparing for such performances. They really wanted me and gave me another year to decide. He said, we really want you to go on it, and, we'll give you another year to decide, which was I thought, very gracious of them. However, I simply knew I could not concentrate enough on preparing for such an undertaking. And actually, former President Jimmy Carter and his wife, and I presume with others, they were all going to accompany me on the trip. So it was really a shame I couldn't go. My husband was always thrilled for me to get more exposure with my music. But it was due to the estate also. I mean, that was the main thing. I saw what was going on, and I had given my executive powers to them to make decisions. And of course, when I got back, I was so concerned about everything. It didn't enter my mind about that. So anyway, Glendora, here starts the process of destroying my music. I formed a group to help me, including interviewing attorneys. We had to interview a lot of attorneys, and I got advice from certain people. We formed a group, and there was it consumed a great deal of time and thought. And of course, if my husband were around, it would be quite different, wouldn't it? But he wasn't there. So if someone had told me that I'd have real problems with White and Case, a law firm, and the Bankers Trust Company, I basically just wouldn't believe them. I couldn't even believe it then. I never would believe them. I think my husband was too smart to let that happen to me. I simply wouldn't believe him. In fact, as everything unfolded, I just couldn't even believe it then. They were such good actors, accommodating my husband and myself like they were our real friends. So I'm doing this to make people aware of these silent thieves. They're very clever. I know of other prominent families, and even not so prominent, that they have done this too. In fact, the court has a leaflet stating a court for widows and orphans. Well, think again. It's a court for lawyers, banks, and con men. As I stated before, I've gone through 7 different attorneys, minus over $1 million, trying to get justice and helping my stepchildren, since they didn't get their inheritance either. It was suggested to me that I form protests, I picket, and I make it public. Since we were writing the bank different times, and we wouldn't get answers, or we'd get answers to our questions that really weren't correct. So it took a lot of our time. Much of the publicity was spiked also. In fact, they lie. I read in one article a spokesperson at the bank responded to a reporter at a paper saying the estate went bankrupt due to taxes. This is just a continuation of the big lie propaganda that they, federal felons, continue to engage in. They lie and deny. In fact, I have a friend whose family was in the insurance business and asked me why my husband didn't have insurance to pay all the estate taxes. So what kind of estate planning did White and Case and Bankers Trust Company prepare? Aside from attorneys, one of my stepsons, David, and one of my group and myself contacted the IRS directly and secured a meeting. At the meeting, the agent, Harvey Weiss, asked me if I received my marital deduction of $11 million, to which I said no, plus the other which was to be in trust. He spoke to us and then opened all the IRS records. He first telephoned Win Rutherford of White and Case, since we all understood he was the estate attorney at that time. At that time, of course, we were not aware that he had abandoned the estate by filing papers representing the bank for a loan to be paid back by my husband's estate. Legally, White and Case could not represent the bank, as I said before, and the estate, as we were told by the newspaper publisher, Ralph Martinelli, who met with Judge Albert Emanuele, told Ralph about this. Plus, the bank is not listed as an executor on the letters testamentary as Bankers Trust Company. It's listed as Bankers Trust of New York, which came into existence 10 years later after my husband's death. As I stated before, but I really will emphasize that because these are very important things. Now, Harvey Weiss, the IRS agent, permitted us to make copies, and when we explained some things we had knowledge of, he was taken back. At one point, we were looking at the income-producing properties my husband owned and had many questions. My stepson Eddie Jr. claimed partial ownership of the income-producing properties in the estate, and the IRS, in the estate tax audit, rejected any ownership he claimed, and the estate had to pay taxes based on 100% ownership, because basically Eddie could not prove he owned any of it. Also, we discovered that there were no partnership tax returns filed on any of these properties. When we brought this to Win Rutherford's attention of White and Case and the bank, Bankers Trust at that time, they had new appraisals done with the purpose to obtain a tax refund for the estate of over $500,000, as we were told. Harvey Weiss, the IRS agent, related that when he met with Rutherford, who was masquerading as the estate attorney, Rutherford handed Harvey Weiss the new paperwork. And when Harvey Weiss, the IRS agent, asked him what this was all about, Rutherford explained what he wanted. The IRS agent looked at him and said, "Listen, if you want a tax refund, we will reopen the whole estate." Upon hearing this, Rutherford grabbed the papers out of his hands and hurriedly left the office. In a hurry. Although Rutherford promised the tax refund, they never told us the facts until we heard it directly from the IRS what had transpired. Rutherford and the bank told us simply that the IRS would not do it and gave us no details. This all happened before we had contact with Harvey Weiss at IRS and found out what the true facts were. What a fraud. This ended up as a huge swindle with Eddie Jr. I must add here that the delegation of authority that I had signed before going to Russia, my group had discovered as we were reviewing things, I had forgotten about, and it was discovered, and they insisted, they checked and saw the records, and had me reinstate, immediately voided the document and revoked my delegations and reclaimed my powers as a legal executor of my husband's estate. They did a swindle with Eddie Jr. mainly during the time I was in Russia. Millions were lost. I'm trying to give facts, Glendora, chronologically. It's rather difficult because this is like 20 years ago that these things all took place, and it's amazing how the time has just flown by because we were always busy trying to do things, either picketing, protesting, working on publicity, whatever. But I'll jump a minute to the present year, 2020, just for this one fact. That this past year, the bank, there was money in a couple separate accounts of the estate left there for many years. And I was getting statements every month for many years. But all of a sudden, this past June, I saw that they took out $600,000 out of the estate. I didn't know anything about it. Now, they claimed there was some kind of court thing that went on about it. But, you know, little dear old David Kiko of Pillsbury never telephoned me or discussed it. He knew very well I didn't even get my initial legacy, full legacy. He knew all this. But what do you have to do? Keep running to the judge who they have in their pockets? So they didn't really explain. So I wondered, what did they do with the $600,000? How in the world are they entitled to any legal fees or commissions? In the meantime, you know, they're not on the letters. It was all fraudulent, and it still is. So to me, it's a complete fraud, like a lot of things we know today go on. But that was very clear. I did write a letter to them asking them, one certified and one registered, and I believe they only received the one letter. The other was lost, I guess. It all went to the same address, but we're still investigating on that. But we asked about copies for the tax returns and all related documents to this amount of money that they withdrew from the account. But we got a reply from David Kiko, not from the trustee of the bank, which we wrote. They always turn it over to David Kiko. So he answered and wrote back. Effectively, he just told us to go away. I mean, they were paid for fees or whatever. Now, you know, it's quite upsetting. My life has been very upsetting with all these kind of things that occur. I'll go back again to the years that I'm speaking about in 1995. I think we're around that time now. When a firm like White & Case, professional firm like this, and Bankers Trust, I have here in my notes, why would a main beneficiary such as a wife have to fight the bank and the law firm to follow the will? Because they were not following the will. I hope people who listen to this understand the scheme that these people pull. It's intimidating for me and for my husband's name. They try to blame others like my stepson. Oh, he was difficult. Well, I thought they knew about these kind of things. That's why we hired them. They met with us many times before. They knew about the son. They knew about our whole situation. I don't understand. What were they hired for? Why are they getting paid? And now they're taking money out of the estate account for legal fees? What legal fees? What is justice for attorneys to fight for a beneficiary who's entitled to plenty of money that's on hand in the estate? As Win Rutherford stated, there's so much money in this estate it will never run out. Well, anyway, now back to the earlier years, as I say, around 1995. I was receiving checks from the IRS. Here's another very interesting item. I was receiving checks from the IRS for joint refunds from before date of death, made out to Suzanne and Edmund McCormick. So Honest Me reported this to a very pleasant trust officer who was always, oh, Suzanne, you know, we will do this, we will do that. Anyway, he was very pleasant and he was in charge of the estate. His reply was, just send us the check, Suzanne, and we will return whatever is yours. My part-time secretary did make a copy of one of the checks for $69,000. And I don't know, there were maybe 8 of them, I don't recall how many, to prove my name was on with my husband. So whatever checks appeared after, the bank had their name added to the check along with our names. So it went to them, and I never saw any of the money. They listed some of it in the final accounting, however it was not complete, and I never received any of it. At least half of it had to be mine. The last building sold in the real estate portfolio was a large income-producing apartment building, which they did not have me listed as a grantor on the deed, even though I was a legal executor on the letters testamentary. They listed Bankers Trust Company as an executor of the estate, and further stated they were formerly known as Bankers Trust of New York. They put this all on the document, which is a total fraud. I mean, Bankers Trust, they didn't know what to say. They were probably asked, well, why is Bankers Trust of New York here? Oh, we were formerly known as that. They had other executors sign, including Eddie Jr., but not me. They knew I would object to all this. In fact, one of the interested parties who wanted the building telephoned me to say, Suzanne, we had offered a much larger amount. But I guess they knew I guess the bank knew. I told the fellas who called me to contact the bank since they were in charge. And as I understand, they sold it to the property manager they had chosen. Now, I might add, when my husband was living, he emphasized to me certain important issues. And the one, of course, was the legacy of $500,000, which was due 1 month after death. Remember, as I said, they had liquidated stocks and bonds amounting to $7 million at least. And, of course, there was a lot of other assets in the estate. All these years, 30 years, I've received about half of the $500,000 in 2 payments. I think I had said that previously in here. Anyway, and then the second thing was there was a trust to be formed, of which I would receive income plus interest in addition to an extra $50,000 a year. Plus, I had the extras given to me 2 homes in the art collection and possessions. And my husband's McCormick and Company. My husband now explained to me clearly about an option period he had in the will in regard to the real estate. My husband knew his son, Eddie Jr., would try to get whatever buildings of the real estate that he could. However, he said Eddie could not get them due to the capital gains tax. So he said, I'll give him 6 months to decide and 1 year to come up with any money. However, he said he will not be able to because he's not able to or he's not in a position to afford any buildings due to the capital gains tax. My husband was actually trying to protect me, as he explained, and his family. And as we know, the IRS disallowed any ownership by the son, Eddie. When Rutherford knew that, what was the reason they were trying to please Eddie is what I am asking. What are they getting out of this besides legal fees? Legally, they abandoned the estate. Anyway, Eddie ended up with 2 excellent buildings after the swindle was done, which I called a swindle. One would have been a large asset for the estate in Summit, New Jersey. In regard to the option period, the children and I did speak up. After 1 year, we said time is up. Eddie could not come up with the money, as was explained to me. Well, when Rutherford said, let's give him a little more time. The children and I were getting very upset because they knew their brother, and in the end they wanted to disown him. They mentioned to me they were going to take him out of the family pictures. Now the son David with me went to the accountant's office, which was one of the executors, Herman Markowitz, and really quizzed him about what was going on. The accountant, Herman Markowitz, was very nervous and had trouble explaining his way out of this. The time period that when Rutherford extended to accommodate Eddie got to be around 1.5 to 2 years. And also, who was billed for all these hours negotiating with Eddie? I imagine the estate. When Rutherford of White and Case admitted to me that while I was in Russia, they spent hours and hours in Eddie's office, as I recall, dealing with him and negotiating with him, ending up with 2 buildings. There was a dispute of the ownership of certain property, and as I understand, Bankers Trust Company and White and Case were involved in other estates too that we heard about. We heard and met many people who had troubles with the bank, lawyers and judges, as I said before, because of course we were picketing and meeting a lot of people. Some prominent, some not so prominent. However, that doesn't matter. One of the people coming out of the bank spoke with us, and they said, they gave us copies of a segmentation of the bank, which was milk, exit, and ignore. what they would do is milk the estates, exit the estate, and then ignore it, which was explained in the market segmentation of Bankers Trust Company. And it can be viewed, if anyone wants to read it, on stopestatefraud.org or McCormickEstateFraud.wordpress.com. One person that we met was Jonathan Place from the Place family from Rye, New York. He worked with our group to get help for their family estate. Now, one of the things he did for us, which we also helped him, one of the people coming out of the bank also told us, ask them about their manual. So when Jonathan Place had a deposition with his attorneys, he said, could you tell us whether you have a manual? He asked the trust officer, William Wilkie, who was being deposed. And William Wilkie said, yes, we have one. However, when we had a deposition, we had our attorney ask William Wilkie if he had a manual. And he said, no, we don't have one. The manual was dated, by the way, prior to our deposition. So he perjured himself. This is the trust officer. He was in with Win Rutherford and the whole group. So after that, William Wilkie retired. Very interesting, but he wasn't there long. So he had been there for many years previously. Now, another thing, while we were listening, the judge at this time, I think that I'm up to, was Judge Anthony Scarpino. And we were listening to a local radio station, WFAS, one morning, and heard an in-depth interview, actually, of the new surrogate judge, Anthony Scarpino. And during the interview, we heard that he worked at the FBI for 4 years, and then he worked at Bankers Trust Company for 2 years. This was a major conflict, and he should have disqualified himself, involving all Bankers Trust matters before the surrogate court. I was told that he should have stepped down and, should have discontinued, not gone on with the case. And August 2002, the Sunday feature article in Newsday about trust in banks included a photo of me surrounded by 4 signs that I used while picketing: Bankers Trust Company, Deutsche Bank, and law firm of White and Case. One of the signs said, Judge Scarpino worked for Bankers Trust. The name of the article was Inherited Problems. Now, when Anthony Scarpino saw this publicity I had, then he held it up. This was after 2 years I had mentioned it. It took that long before we got this publicity in. Then he held up the page with a photo in court and said, I do not like this, but there's nothing I can do about it. Then he would entertain motions for disqualification or recusal. Papers were filed, and in January 2003, nothing had happened. So through a friend, I went to see the New York State Attorney, and after hearing what I said, she said, I'm calling the New York State Attorney, Elliot Spitzer. In early February, it is my understanding that Elliot Spitzer summoned Anthony Scarpino, Judge Anthony Scarpino, to his office and had a sit-down talk with him. Shortly thereafter, Judge Scarpino recused himself from the McCormick estate. Finally. Then we were sent to Rockland County surrogate court that made one decision regarding the estate and then was withdrawn and threw the hot potato back to White Plains. Then the estate was moved to Dutchess County Surrogate Court with Judge Bagonis. My attorney at that time filed papers for the removal of Bankers Trust Company, Deutsche Bank, from the estate based on the fact that the nominated name was Bankers Trust Company was not named on the letters testamentary that the estate attorney had procured, and nothing happened for years. Eddie Jr. wrote a letter, and it stirred the pot, and the court in Dutchess County looked into the matter, asking about the status of the estate. Since I was not informed, some years later, I and one of my group went to Poughkeepsie Surrogate Court, where Judge Bagonis was, to go through the files. Now, Glendora, I'm going to stop here. This is the end of this episode, and thank you very much for listening, and I'll go to the next one next week. Thank you. Well, Glendora, this is episode 6. This estate is really very troubling, of course, and I'm doing this, I want to say again, I'm doing it to let other people know so they're alerted, because this thing is kept very quiet. Everything. They never want anyone to know about this kind of thing going on, because if they can have access to estates where they can get money, they surely don't want people to know about this, what goes on. So anyway, I'm trying to do things according to the calendar, but some of the events that took place are very difficult. Now, what I left off with was that Eddie Jr., my stepson, who had given us quite a bit of problems here all along, and they knew it. They knew about Eddie. He started to, he was getting concerned because there weren't a lot of things happening. So, of course he was concerned, because he got what he tried to get, and he didn't want anyone investigating him any further or trying to sue him. So he wanted this estate closed. I mean, please close it. So he started investigating and stirring up the waters because things were a little quiet, and he thought, you know, he was going to try to get the estate closed. So it did stir up things a little bit, and at this point, really, I think it was around this point, actually, I had filed papers. My attorney did, the last attorney, Jason Bogley, who had been with the Ray Dowd law firm, had filed papers for me, and they went to, they were transferred supposedly, or we filed them in Westchester, and we also filed them in Poughkeepsie with Dutchess County, since we were transferred up there. And from what we know, they were not filed. We filed them, we filed them, but they were not recorded. And what they did with them, we don't know, whether they buried them or whatever they did with them. It's really a racket. It's an illegal enterprise carried on for a profit. That's really what's going on with these people. So when I filed these papers, I was not informed of any decision of the estate with these filings, which Jason Bogley had done. And we understand that we were told later that the time period had expired, that they hadn't made any decision. Therefore, all our demands in our papers were effectively approved, because they mysteriously either lost them or whatever they did and went over the time period, which makes them effectively approved. So they killed their own purpose, I guess. Some years later, I and one of my group then, when there was no decision or anything, we went to Poughkeepsie Surrogate Court to go through files. And we began making copies of estate pertinent papers in the file, some of which were quite revealing. The chief clerk, who was actually, I guess, quite new there, demanded to see what copies we were making and began going through them. And she said that many things we were copying we had no right to see. Now here I am, the wife, the main beneficiary and executor, and she said I have no right to see them all. Well, what was going on? And proceeded to remove many of the copies, saying, you cannot see this stuff. However, one of the salient facts that we discovered in these pages was that the former clerk who was there in Poughkeepsie, as I said, did not record the papers. We discovered that. And they were filed, as I say, but they didn't record them. So this new clerk got very excited when we were in there and had another member of the staff, court staff, who was an attorney, sit and closely watch us while we went through some boxes to listen what we said and what we did. Whatever we copied, they examined closely. And of course, she made this statement, you cannot see this stuff. They had boxes, and I think she was trying to reconstruct the file, actually, because a lot of it was lost or buried in the transfer from Westchester to Poughkeepsie. So she was trying to reconstruct it. And so she said, if you want to come back to this court to go through any more papers, you'll have to make an appointment to examine the papers, and you will be supervised. The situation was very hostile and contentious toward us. As a result, we did believe they were obviously hiding and covering up their misdeeds. You know, Glendora, it's very upsetting, my life, everything I went through with these things, because I was fighting for justice, let's face it. And they didn't like it. They don't want anyone fighting for justice. They want you to say, you know, well, I'll just settle for whatever I can get. Well, no, thank you. I don't do that. Anyway, I'd like to add here that the files, you know, are for public record, and their attitude was definitely exhibited to us by the individuals and officials of the court system that are paid for the public and are paid to work for us. But obviously, they weren't working for us. This should not be the attitude of any public servants in the court. They should be there to try to help you, but they weren't there. The chief clerk we had to deal with, the new one that was there, her name was Erika S. de Traglia, I believe, Traglia. She was the chief clerk and an attorney. Now, in January 2001, this was when Judge Scarpino came into the Westchester court, where we were originally, as a new surrogate. And the court tried to clean up the old cases that had been lingering in that court. Emanuele, who was the judge before Scarpino, as I mentioned it. Ralph Martinelli, the Westchester newspaper owner and publisher, played an important role in trying to help me, really. I mean, he knew my husband very well, and he knew he was an honorable person, and he really felt for me. He tried very hard. And of course, he owned a newspaper, so he could publish anything. He had a meeting with the former judge, Emanuele, and he extracted the important and critical information from Albert Emanuele that White and Case had abandoned my husband's estate when they filed papers approximately 2 months after death after being designated as an estate attorney, and they represented Bankers Trust, their enduring client, for repayment of a loan from my husband. And it was $500,000, and they took it from the estate. But they represented Bankers Trust. They were their attorney. So there's a big conflict there. How could they be the estate attorney also? And Judge Emanuele pointed that out to Ralph Martinelli, the newspaper publisher. Now, there was another thing that was also wrong, and that he just wouldn't reveal. It was too serious. But we found it out later, as I will let you know.